Except for in Louisiana. Except for in Baltimore. Except for in D.C. Except for in Cleveland. Except for anywhere where they're dying. Except for anywhere they're dying.
Somebody order a pizza?
You just like to yell. You just like to yell. But why do they matter?
Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Why don't you do something for
Black
it?
lives matter. Black lives matter.
Yelling is not helping any black lives.
Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Then go to Baltimore.
Black lives matter.
Go to Louisiana.
Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Then go do something for them.
Black lives matter.
Go help them.
Black lives
They're dying
matter.
right now.
Black lives
Instead, you're
matter.
standing out Trump rally yelling like an idiot.
Another one.
There was a shooting just a couple miles from that burned-down Quick Trip in Ferguson. A 23-year-old African-American man was shot and killed by police officers. Police say it was suicide by cop. And according to police, this young man was saying, "Please kill me, please shoot me." I'm not questioning the suicide by cop part. What I'm wondering why no one is talking about this is the mental health of that young man. And I was talking with a friend last night who was saying, why is no one discussing mental health of young men of color in this country? And I'm wondering, Mark Lamont Hill, why?
I think there are a few reasons. I think one, just as a nation, we don't talk about mental health. We mock people for going to see therapists. We call people crazy. When you look at even pop culture with the haunted house, with the psychos inside, there's this whole culture that stigmatizes mental health illness. I think also with young black men, because they're seen as being prone to violence, being prone to irrationality, because they're seen as unintelligent and often immoral, when they display behaviors that are clearly crying for help, we dismiss it as just as part of their normal everyday pathology. And then I think oftentimes within the African-American community, we also stigmatize mental health issues. We tell people to take it to the church, take it to Jesus. We don't go to see therapists, even at the same rate as our white counterparts. And then on top of that, when you're in a context of racism and white supremacy, you engage more trauma. When you live in a war zone like Chicago, or in this case Ferguson, you're surrounded by death and violence and harassment. And so you have more triggers, and we need to deal with that in a very substantive way.
Larry Elder, I would love to hear your voice.
Well, I think the media perceives, Brooke, racism to be a far bigger problem in America. That's why we spend so much time on people like Donald Sterling and Cliven Bundy, and before that it was Paul Ryan who said some things that were perceived to be racially intemperate. I think we've been training black people to think that racism is a bigger deal, and I think the reason that the left wants that is because of votes and power. As long as black people believe that race and racism are the major problem in America, you got that 95% monolithic black vote without which the Democratic Party cannot survive. So you have the Jessies and the Als and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Harry Reid constantly bringing up race cards, talking about the Republicans waging a war against black people and so forth. So black people have been trained, surprise, surprise, people in Ferguson believe that the racist criminal justice system is oppressing them because Obama and Eric Holder have said statements that have given them that impression.
Are you saying
no, it is not a major problem in this country. No, it is not. My father was a janitor. He was born in the Jim Crow South. Fast forward, my father in his late 40s started a small business, got a little bit of property. This is what happens in America. Raised 3 boys, educated them. We have a thriving black middle class. If black America were a country, Brooke, it would be the 15th wealthiest country in the world. For crying out loud, this is not your grandfather's America. We ought not act like it is.
Yeah, but Larry, I don't think, for 2 things. One, I think your earpiece could be broken because the question was on mental health, and you once again go back to the pathologies of the black community. That's stunning to me. But
why do you have to insult me all the time? Why can't you address what I said rather than insulting me? Why is that necessary? Can we have a discussion as 2 black men without insulting each other? Is that possible? Can we try and do that, please?
Larry, I haven't insulted you. Larry, I'm not insulting you. What I'm responding to
is the... You said I was sounding a dog whistle. Why do Republicans always use a dog whistle? Why don't you deal with what I said, the merits of what I said? For a change, Lamont, I watch you all the time. You talk over people. You don't listen to the merits of what they say.
You're talking over me. Like, first of all, okay, a few things. I never said dog whistle. Second, you're saying engage what you talked about.
You did.
I just talked. Let me finish. I didn't. When you rewind this, you'll realize you were wrong. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community, and you responded by talking about black people and believing that racism still exists. You totally didn't acknowledge my question or respond to my comment. So let's
because I want us to have perspective and talk about what's important, but you won't do that.
Oh no, well you don't get to decide what's important. You know, we all have opinions here. I made a comment. I wanted you to respond to it, but I'll respond to your comment.
You think the problem of unarmed black people is a major problem in America, and I don't.
Okay,
I don't.
So let me tell you what I think now that you've spoken. There are 2 issues here. You mentioned black-on-black crime. You say that that's a problem. I agree with you that it's a problem.
It's a huge problem. Massive problem.
Larry, I agree with you.
One
Let's not
voice,
argue about something
gentlemen. One voice. Mark.
I agree with Larry Elder that black and black violence is an issue. I absolutely agree with him. So let's not argue about what we both agree on. I agree. But if this study bears out, and it does, that at least that every 28 hours an unarmed black person is killed, then that also is a problem. Is it as big a problem
that
as
means
this
it's
other
less
issue?
than 2% of the total, Lamont. Less than 2% of the total. 7,000 black people killed every year. Less than 2% are killed by police officers in an unarmed way. So why don't we talk about the 98%? And many of these murders in Chicago are unsolved. At least we know what happened in the Michael Brown case.
Another one.
But yet you still say we're at a war with Islam?
Are we not at a war?
That is the most ignorant, stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Are we not at a war with radical jihadism?
Okay, but are they not at a war with radical Christianity, okay?
Oh my God.
Where are we at war with radical Christianity?
Really?
No, really. I don't know.
Are you kidding me?
Actually, explain to me.
Just,
Where are we at war with radical Christians?
yeah, they're trying to target us for no reason.
Where are the radical Christianity war? Where is that happening?
The people in power. The people in power want to make us turn on each other. That's exactly why you're trying to do this.
These are radical Christians?
Get feelings from
I
people.
just want to know about this radical Christian war that's going on. I haven't heard of it.
Ask other countries. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you for making an ass of yourself. Now let's watch your girlfriend do the same.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I actually lived in the Middle East for 2 years as a child.
Well, fuck. That's really good. Now, if you could reply with the proper, like assalamu
Oh, you see, I had a... Yeah,
alaikum
no.
assalam.
Yeah, not a fan.
Have a good day.
Growing up there as a young girl, I wasn't a big fan of having to cover myself all the time. The actual rape culture that goes on in the Middle East, and throwing gays off of buildings and such. I wasn't a big fan of that. Being an American over there.
Neither am I, but you don't think Donald Trump is after the same policies?
I don't think he wants to throw gays off of buildings. No.
No, but he's openly against them in radical form.
Open against what?
Gay people, Islamic people, black people, Mexican people. He's all about the hate.
What did he do to gay people?
He's openly slandered a bunch of...
What did he say? I don't know. I would like to know about this. I haven't heard this.
You haven't heard anything about...
I haven't heard him say bad things about gays, no.
Okay. Well, look at stuff from the 1990s.
I don't know if you can even really compare saying a few things to really throwing them off of buildings either.
You're right. You're right. Sticks and stones will not break bones, but words do hurt.
The social justice warrior motto.
Yeah, I think I'd rather hear a few nasty words than be thrown off the building.
Me too. And that's where we're all the same on a human level.
Don't think it's quite a valid comparison, is my point.
Okay. Well, that's different. Have a good day.
Another one bites the dust.
I am standing in the middle of 1984 civilization. I am standing in the middle of the most ignorant people who think they have a clue what's going on. I have proven time and time again trying to engage in political discourse with these people, and you've seen the responses time and time again. No logic, no research, no clue. And now we have an entire group of people. Hey, you know what is the funny thing? If these people could actually rally behind a real movement, they could do something. If they spent half the energy they spent protesting Trump, they could build a business. They could get a job. They could improve their family. They could improve their lives. But they don't want to do that. They're into the groupthink, the herdthink, which is, oh, Donald Trump has caused all of our problems. It's all Trump's fault. This is the brainwashing in the media. This is the brainwashing in the schools, and I am in the epicenter of it right now. This is amazing. They know 5 words. Why don't you like Donald Trump?
Because us kids want to have a future.
Donald Trump's your best hope.
No, us kids want to have a future.
Who's going to provide you a future?
Another president.
Who?
Not Donald Trump.
Hillary Clinton's going to provide you a future?
Yes, Hillary.
Let me ask you a question, though. Hillary Clinton has been in government for 2 decades. Would you say America's gotten better?
Yes.
Well, then why are you out here protesting?
Because Donald Trump is going to make it worse.
But why do you say that? How is he racist?
He's racist.
How? What has he done that's racist?
What has he not done?
I'm asking you what he has done. He's hired people from every country. He's hired people of every race. He married an immigrant. Donald Trump has created thousands of jobs. No other candidate's done that.
Yeah. Another one.
Yes, there is a problem within the black community, and yes, we need more policing inside our neighborhoods rather than less, because if there are more police officers, there aren't going to be as many shootings, as many open-air drug markets, kidnappings, which is high.
Black people who were shot by the police, there are many?
There are. I mean, I think it's like 153, about 153 to 200 that died last year. And it's tragic. It's a tragedy whenever a police officer shoots somebody or when anybody dies. But to blow it out of proportion, to say that black people are being shot every single day is a lie. I think 965 black people died last year, and of that, I think 40% of them were white, and the other 30% were Latinos, and then others, what have you. So black people, I think as a percentage, it was like 17%, and they're 13% of the population, which means on average, I mean, when you actually scale it down, they're pretty much represented fairly. And by the way, there's only 1 million police officers in America. 1 million police officers that are policing 320, 340 million Americans, right? So when 900 of the people die, justly or unjustly, you're not even talking about 1/10 of 1%. That is like a 99% satisfaction rate, and when it comes down to policing.
So there's no discrimination in the United States.
I didn't say that. Of course there's discrimination. There's discrimination. Are you married? I mean, when you pick your husband, you're going to discriminate against a lot of men. I mean, there's discrimination of all sorts. I'm not saying that there's no discrimination. I'm not saying that there's no racism. I don't think that the police officers are systematically racist. And I don't think it's a problem, to be honest with you, in America.
So you said there is racism and discrimination. What would Donald Trump do about it?
I don't think Donald Trump can really do anything about discrimination or racism because it's a single thing, right? So I mean, if I wanted to be outwardly racist to somebody because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, how is Donald Trump going to stop me? Is he going to put in a law that's going to throw me in prison? Well, then there's going to be a lot of free speech violations and what have you. Donald Trump, no president can stop somebody from being racist. It's your own thoughts. That's called thought policing, and I don't think that we don't want that in America.
You can't just tar feminism with the brush of current day, some small strand of radical feminism. I mean, feminists got women the right to vote. Shouldn't you give an enormous thank you to them? Not just because you're a woman, but also because for the sake of humanity, they did a great service to all of us?
Okay, well, there were two movements there, right? There was the suffragist movement, and then there was the suffragette movement. And the suffragist movement was interested in votes for everybody. And a lot of them really resented the suffragettes, particularly a lot of female suffragists resented the suffragettes because the suffragettes got up to all kinds of crazy stuff. They lobbed bombs, they burned post offices, I read an account in a man's diary from back then that they tried to push him off a cliff out of chivalry. He didn't report the attempted murder. They got into all kinds of criminal activities and stuff like that. I mean, you could even say they were domestic terrorists. And a lot of the suffragists were like, you're just demonstrating that women shouldn't have the vote. I mean, and a lot of public sentiment back then, and this is the history that we don't get told. A lot of public sentiment back then was, well, if this is how women behave, like, should they get the vote? And another thing, too, there were politicians in the UK who were discussing giving the women the vote long before the suffragettes started up. And
I'm sure, Karen, if they continue to ask politely, men would have given it to them anyway. Men have been such sweethearts throughout history. I'm sure they would have just said, hey, women, even though we've denied you the right to vote for the entire history of mankind, literally mankind, if you just stuck around and been polite, we'd have given it to you anyway. Come on, Karen, you got to realize that's the biggest load of horse crap you've ever heard in your life.
They took a poll in England of women and 70% of them didn't want the vote. They thought.
I know, and the women in Saudi Arabia want the burqa. I know, it's because of the culture that they grew up in. Karen, give me a thank you. Look, everything's going great, but you're not being reasonable. You're being ridiculous. Give me a thank you. Give me a thank you for feminists for getting your right to vote. Otherwise, stop voting and go make me a ham sandwich.
Another one. Can you give me an example of something he's said or done that's sexist or racist?
Oh yes, Trump has called for many policies that would hurt working class women, that would hurt women of color. Trump is an enemy of the people and an enemy of progress in all things. Yeah.
But can I have a specific example, please?
Well, the specific examples are the examples of his speeches, the things he said about Muslims in his debates, his desire to build a wall around the United States to keep immigrants out. Trump has consistently
illegal immigrants,
people who have been driven out of their country because of imperialism and who have come here to find a better life. So the people that are here have every right to be here, and Trump wants to pass policies that will make life harder for them.
So are you saying you don't want a border?
We want all people to be able to come here and have
legally or illegally.
We want people to come here and have access to basic material things, from education to healthcare. We want people to be able to come here and get a job with a decent wage. And we don't want anybody to be terrorized by the kind of policies that Donald Trump and his puppets want to have passed.
Are you willing to pay for illegal immigrants' homes and education?
We want to have a society where immigrants can come here and get access to decent housing, and where immigrants...
But are you willing to pay for it?
Well, we think that society should take up the task of caring for people, and so yes, I would like to see a society where everybody is equal and has access to the same basic kind of material things that they need to live and to survive and to get around in the world.
So would you volunteer your home and your goods in your home for an illegal immigrant to come live with you and stay?
Yes, we would like to see all immigrant people have access to housing in all communities. There are many apartment facilities here that are empty. In fact, there are many houses that are empty, and they're empty because people can't afford them and get access to them. People are consistently, many people are being affected by these policies, getting evicted, and we would like to see everybody actually have access to that, and housing be a basic kind of human right.
So we can go down the street and get a couple homeless guys and take them to your house, and you'll take them in?
Another one.
We have to be honest about the difference between Christianity and Islam here. And
I'm not seeing it. I mean, we just had a whole conversation about it.
We're not done. We're not done. So
okay.
One very important piece here is the example of Muhammad and the example of Jesus. Muhammad was not a hippie who got crucified. Right? Muhammad was a conquering warlord. Muhammad's ethics, his life course, has much more in common with Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan than it does with Jesus or with Buddha or with Mahavira or other progenitors of the world's, quote, great faiths.
Yeah, but Jesus wanted to conquer the world. He just sucked at it.
No, well, that's one way to say it, but he was not ordering people's heads cut off. He got crucified.
Have the power to.
Well, no, that's, you're reading that into the situation, but I'm saying the ethic you get out of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount doesn't give you, okay, let's cut the heads off of those 300 Jews, and let's take sex slaves.
That's right. If you want to cherry pick the good parts of the Bible, there are plenty.
Yeah, but
there are plenty.
But the bad parts are not as extensive. It's much easier to cherry pick the good parts.
No, we just talked about how the bad parts are extensive, if not worse.
But let me just tell you the difference here. First of all, the Bible is a vast and vastly self-contradictory book, right?
Yeah.
So the cherry picking is made so much easier by the fact that there's no way to reckon. There's no truly central message, and especially if you're taking the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you can forget about half of it very easily. It would take you a month and a half to read the whole thing from cover to cover. The Quran is a much shorter, much more streamlined book, and it is it has a central message which is very much in harmony with the example of Muhammad. It is not the central message of the Quran, arguably, certainly a central message, is you should spread this one true faith to the ends of the earth, and you spread this by conquest, not conversation. It is convert or die, or if you happen to be a person of the book, you can live as a dhimmi. Now that is
so, Sam. That's a very important distinction, though, because the Quran says don't touch the Christians and the Jews; they're people of the book, and of course, it's also wildly contradictory in different parts. And there is a very legitimate case to be made that when they talk about infidels, they're talking about the pagans of the time.
Okay.
And so,
but that's cold comfort to 1.2 billion Hindus who are polytheists and just completely beyond the pale by the light of this doctrine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. But I want to deal with your points.
But Christians want to convert them too, and if they don't convert them, it doesn't matter because they're all going to get blasted by God at the end.
Okay, but that you know to be a fiction, and that's very different than waging war in this life against these people. Okay, the Yazidis are not being killed by the Iraqi Christians. Right, and there's a reason for that.
But then when you get into the real world, Sam, instead of the hypothetical world of the doctrines, right? Again, in the real world, there's two things that are very important that happen. One, historically, Christians have cherry-picked the good parts at times, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, etc., and they have picked hideous parts of the Bible for slavery, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, the anti-Semitism, and the list goes on and on and on. So historically, I mean, on Holocaust alone, let alone everything else I've mentioned here, Christians win. They have been the most violent.
Okay, but again, you have to be more careful here because the Holocaust was not a straightforward and honest implementation of Christian doctrine. You can't look into the Bible and get a good Christian justification for the Holocaust. What you get with
Of course you
no, you can't.
Of course, it says kill them all that don't believe.
Not for Christianity. No, it doesn't. It simply doesn't.
First of all, it's in the Old Testament, which is in the Bible. It's people pretend it's not in the Bible. If it wasn't in the Bible, we just have the New Testament.
Jesus and the central message of his teaching does not get you the Holocaust. There's not a straight line there. There is a straight line.
Like a total excuse to be honest.
Another one.
I want to get this right, so I want to look at my notes for this. According to this, you are black. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay.
And I remember reading one time, Dave, somebody was given a description of some suspect who had done some crime, was running away, and he was described as an African American. How do you know where he was from? Could have been from Africa, could have been from Jamaica, could have been from Canada.
So what do you make of that when someone because I know you really rail against Jesse Jackson and these guys on the left that use, and I want to talk a lot about identity politics. Okay. So the guys that use these phrases, what are they going for there?
Well,
what is the goal there?
The goal is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it. I didn't. A black kid, or a kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
But you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say. Yeah. I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that?
Oh my God! Coochie down to the socks like I'm Biggie Papa. Baby. Keep your girl head in my Tommy boxes, but when it out.
The idea that a racist white cop and shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides. Not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right. And where's the evidence of the lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media's on it. People are watching it, and justice will, for the most part, occur. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was killed, Freddie Gray died in a van. I shouldn't say was killed. Died in a van. Yeah. You have a city that's 45% black. City council is 100% Democrat. The majority of city council is black. The top cop at the time was black. The number 2 cop was black. The majority of the command staff is black. The mayor is black. The AG is black. And yet here we are talking about racism. I mean, it's absurd. I'll tell you something else, too. There was just a study, University of Washington. And it turns out cops were more reluctant, more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect. Probably because of the fear of being accused of racially profiling and the fear that the civil rights establishment was going to come down on him. So if anything, whites are more likely to be shot by a cop under certain circumstances than a black person. And in the last 30 or 40 years, the percentage of suspects killed by cops who are black has declined 75%. However, the percentage of whites killed by cops has flatlined.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, people are more concerned about shooting black people for fear that they're going to be called racist. And almost every one of these incidents, whether it's Eric Gardner in New York, who died because he was selling Lucy's and resisted arrest, whether it's Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was twirling around the gun, whether it's Michael Brown in Ferguson, almost every one of these incidents involves somebody resisting arrest. Why don't you just do what the police tell you? My dad said, when I get pulled over, have my hand at 10 o'clock, have my hand at 2 o'clock, say yes, sir, say no, sir, make sure my paperwork is in order, and if I feel the cop is mistreating me, get a badge number and deal with it later on. If Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Obama and the whole group of them told black people to do that, we'd have a lot fewer of these things to deal with in the first place.
Still Snoop Dogg and D.I. Guess who's back? Dre Day, AK. Though I've grown a lot, can't keep it home a lot. Cause when I frequent the spots that I'm known to rock, you hear the bass from the truck when I'm on the block.
I think, and I mean this in the nicest and most complimentary way possible, you're probably atypical in most respects as a sort of workaholic of either gender. You're probably not typical of women, you're probably not typical of anyone in the kind of work that you do. What I'm talking about is not, bashing women for not putting in the hours. What I'm saying is, in general, women look for different things from life. So they look to fulfill themselves to flourish in slightly different ways. And, of course, if you take if you look at the end statistics about pay, they're going to reflect that. That's not necessarily a problem. Now, when people lose the economic argument, they always switch to the social argument, as your other guest just did. And unfortunately, the problem is that a lot of this is underpinned by this sort of constant victimhood complex that women are encouraged to buy into. They're given this victimhood script about, whether it's rape culture on campus or pay under the male average. And most of it's based on ridiculous sort of social science studies that don't stand up to the most basic scrutiny. Most of it simply isn't true. And I think the majority of women don't want to be patronised, don't want to be given special privileges, don't want to be given special dispensation. They want to go out to the workplace, be paid what they're worth. And of course, if they want to raise a family, they're not going to get to be CEO or not going to get to to be a partner in a law firm. You can't have it all. You can't do all of these things. And what really sort of frustrates me, and I think frustrates a lot of ordinary women who find these sorts of debates a bit dull and a bit mystifying, is that there's some sort of somehow implication always behind the scenes that being, that motherhood is a bad thing, and that it's a bad thing for a woman to aspire to raise a family and to be a mother. Actually, it's sort of one of the most extraordinary things that anybody can accomplish and anybody can do. But there's this sort of assumption that, well, if you do that, then we've got to make sort of special dispensation when you go back to work and pay you more and give you all these benefits and whatever, rather than celebrating the unique things that women can do in society that men can't.
You started off that answer, Nikki, by trying to compliment me and take the wind out of my sails. You have a go.
Absolutely. I've got no time for that argument whatsoever. Women want to do many varied and amazing things for their lives. Motherhood might be part of that. But, again, if that's such a wonderful thing to do, why are men not bending over backwards to take time off to raise their children? They're not, because the culture is not set up to encourage men to share the load of care. Women, even when they're married and working, do more domestic chores than men do. We've seen these surveys time and time again, and I think it's really insulting to say that women, might not be as inclined to work as hard or want different things from life. There are plenty of women who are hugely ambitious. Just look at the number of graduates that we have now. Women are outstripping men. They're getting better degrees. What we haven't seen yet is culture change to accommodate and to reflect that. And I think the other thing is that it tends to be older women often that are also in part-time work positions, but we shouldn't just leave them to flounder. They're often picking up care bills for elderly parents as well as looking after children and the rest of their families. So, I just think Milo's argument is ridiculous that women, shouldn't be paid as much because they want other things from life.
OK, Milo, we've been given more time, so you're going to have to work even harder. It's more than 40 years since the Equal Pay Act, and yet still it is a fact that women do not earn as much as men.
No, I'm sorry, it's not a fact. You can only say that if you take broad brush averages across all industries and all genders, and you can say the amount of money going to women is a bit less.
Well,
it's not. I mean, for one thing, it's illegal to pay a woman less than a man for the same work.
Interrupt him, Nikki. Go on.
No, it's
illegal to pay a woman less.
If that's the case, then when these results are published, they won't reveal anything. They won't reveal any difference, but they're going to. That's the point. The whole reason David Cameron is encouraging it.
I want them to be published because what they're going to show is that at all stages, all else being equal, the genders are paid the same. Or even what they might show, you're saying the culture hasn't changed. I think your argument's 20 years out of date. The culture has changed, which is precisely why there are more women going to university, more women graduate from university, they're getting higher grades, they're 2-to-1 favoured when they go for job applications, particularly in science and technology, and they're paid more, depending on whose figures you believe, up to the age of 30, 35 or 39, it's probably about 35, women are paid more than men. So whatever gender pay gap you're talking about has already been fixed.
But it hasn't.
So the good news for you is that there isn't a problem anymore, although there used to be, and that if we do release these figures, which I'm very excited about, they're going to prove me right. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
But that's not true. I mean, the point is the gap is there still, and older women in particular suffer more from it from younger women. We shouldn't just leave older women, to flounder, should we? Just because they were part of a generation where it was even more difficult for them to get on.
I'm making a specific explanation about where these figures come from, and you haven't really addressed the point that I'm making. What I'm saying is that you can only create this gender gap when you take a broad brush across all genders, all sectors, all work. That doesn't reflect the different choices people make, and employers shouldn't be forced to pay a full-time salary to somebody who works part-time. You haven't come up with a solution to that, and you haven't addressed the problem with the figures, which is that no serious economist treats the gender pay gap as a problem to be solved. No economist thinks this is a problem because they realise what I'm explaining.
Is that male economists or female economists, just to be clear?
Well, I mean, where I get most of my figures on this from is from a feminist female academic, Christina Hoff Sommers at the American Enterprise Institute in the US, who looks at the figures from the UK and the US, and she does a broad survey of all economists, I'm sure of all genders, but my source for this sort of stuff is generally Christina Hoff Sommers. So she is a female feminist academic who is mystified that this is this sort of feminist myth that won't die.
Another one.
Now, do pet names drive you crazy? According to a new survey, most women can't stand being called bird, chick or babe. We were having a bit of fun with this yesterday, and lots of you have been in touch with your views. So we're going to bring you some of those in a second. But first, we went onto the streets of the capital to ask women which phrases they'd like to be added to the banned list.
Don't call me baby. You got some loving, baby, that'll never do. You know I don't belong to you. It's time you knew I'm not your baby. I belong to me, so don't call me baby.
So Are pet names offensive, or are we taking them too seriously? Joining me to discuss this are the author Peter Lloyd and comedian Kate Smurthwaite. Kate Smurthwaite, what really winds you up about pet names?
Well, it's not any particular name that bothers me. What it is the context in which it's used, isn't it? It's absolutely fine if you're, really good friends with somebody and they have a nickname for you and you like it and they know you like it. Great, fantastic. But the difficulty comes when you're trying to have a business meeting and somebody says, oh, hello, Martin. Hello, Simon. Hello, sweetie. And you just can't help thinking, I'm not the one that's getting promotion at this meeting. It's just about kind of being taken seriously. And I know that if somebody said to you, if I came on air and you called me Kathy and I said, oh, actually, I prefer Kate, of course, you'd just call me Kate. You'd call me whatever I asked to be called. And I think it's amazing that we live in a world where we know that women, because our survey shows it and your people you've met on the street show it, women don't like being referred to by these terms generally. So, is it really too much to ask that either don't do it or just ask first? Is it all right if I call you this? Do you mind if I call you this? It's just a bit of a habit of mine, and some women don't mind. Give those that do a chance to say what they'd rather be referred to as.
Well, we've been doing just that. Let's have a listen to what Danielle has had to say. She's sent in this video explaining why she dislikes one pet name in particular.
As a trans woman, I'm used to being called all kinds of things. Hun, love, dude, but nothing, not even sir, gets under my skin quite like my dear. Deliberate misgendering can be frustrating, but it's rarely from malice, at least not from people who matter. It's usually just a misunderstanding or some confusion. My dear, however, well, that's condescending and demeaning. It's dripping with passive aggression and stinks of self-superiority. Frankly, my dear, don't ever refer to me as your dear.
Carla, meanwhile, hates some phrases but loves others. Had two examples there, Peter. My dear, sweet cheeks. I mean, is it sexist? Is it demeaning to women? And if so, why does it continue?
Well, I think it's really sad that the free market and mainstream culture is entertaining this outrage culture, which it seems so pervasive at the moment. I mean, it's already taken over universities, and now it seems to be bleeding into advertising and marketing. I mean, this research was undertaken by Kellogg's. We know for a fact that banning words doesn't work, policing language doesn't work. It didn't work for Sheryl Sandberg when she wanted to ban the word bossy. It's not going to work now, and nor should it. It's Orwellian. It's like something from 1984. People just need to toughen up.
You brought up the word bossy there, Peter. I mean, that is often used for little girls, isn't it? And that's a sign of how early this starts.
Yeah, but used in many different ways and against boys as well. I mean, I noticed that this research didn't look at all at the language that men don't feel comfortable with, and at no point did it hold any women accountable for the language that they choose to use. So if we're really going to have this debate about whether language has power, and it does, then we need to do it equally. But let's be realistic. Language has power, but it's limited power.
Let's bring in Kate Smurthwaite again on that. Should we, to use another phrase that women have said is deeply offensive to them, just man up and let it wash over us, Kate?
Well, I think Peter's kind of completely missing the point. Nobody is saying that words need to be banned, and interesting, he says, why are people so outraged? And yet not one of the people you interviewed was screaming or was outraged. They were just saying, this is how I'd rather be addressed. I don't really like this. And I think it's not a particularly shocking thing to say, this is the term I'd prefer. And I think, once people have made it clear what language they prefer, and it's pretty clear from this survey that women would prefer not, especially in the workplace, not to be called babe and sweetie and love and those kind of terms. I think it's just not a big ask to say, hey, well, if you've said, I don't want to be addressed that way, let's just not do it. In the same way that if somebody corrects you that they prefer to be called, Mr. or they prefer to be called Ms. or Mrs. or Miss, just do what they've asked, because that's just polite and civilised. And I don't think anyone is calling for words to be banned. But if I say, oh, actually, my name's not Kathy, it's Kate, and you continue to call me Kathy for days and weeks and months, I mean, I just think, well, you're a bit unpleasant, don't I? I think that's really rude. And why would you keep doing that? And in actual fact, why are you doing that when you know it's going to annoy me? So I think it's not a big ask. What amazes me is that there's a pushback. Is people going, well, it's my free speech, and I can say, well, it is your free speech. Say what you like, but by the same token, I think women should be absolutely free to say, I don't like that term, and in fact, I might not answer to it.
Well, I mean, I agree, Kate. I agree with much of what you're saying, and I think women should absolutely be allowed to kind of, modify the language that's used to describe them if they're not comfortable with that. But that applies to everybody. And because it's such a minor issue, it can just be done with a bit of humour on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't need to be a big issue.
But I wonder, Peter Lloyd, some of the phrases that we're talking about could be described as being affectionate or humorous, for example, but there are others when you talk about women being ball breakers and when you talk about ambitious women with negative connotations that aren't necessarily applied to men, that we're talking in a little bit more serious territory here.
Well, what I think is very interesting is that frequently it's women who use these terms to describe other women. So are we saying that we should be only policing the language that women use, or is it only a problem when men use it? And if that's the case, then why? Why is it only a problem when men use it?
And what about
but
words
nobody's
that
saying
offend
that.
you,
Sorry,
Peter, as a
nobody's
man?
saying that. Nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying these words are only a problem when men say them. We're talking generally about the terms that we use. And I find it very strange to have this well, what about women? What about if women say it? Women can say sexist things, and black people can say racist things, and gay people can say homophobic things. None of these things are specifically about, one group attacking on another. They're all about a culture and what kind of language we use in our culture. And we should all be looking at how can we use language better? Because as you said yourself, Peter, language does have power. So let's use that power to create a more positive and constructive culture.
Peter,
and it's not about some sort of moratorium on individual words, tearing them out of the dictionary. It's about being part of a conversation about the best respectful language, especially in the workplace, where people really have a right to be treated respectfully.
We are unfortunately running out of time. But Peter, I just want to get one final thought from you. Are there words that are used to describe men that offend you?
Not particularly, and if there are some I don't like, I certainly wouldn't want them banned. But it always goes back to that old adage: sticks and stones may break my bones, but there will always be something to offend a feminist.
Peter Lloyd.
No, that's just obnoxious.
Peter
Sorry,
Lloyd,
you have to give me a chance to respond to that. That is ridiculous. No, hang on, I won't do your show again if you don't let me respond to that.
Go on, Kate, have a word.
Come on, that's ridiculous. I mean, first of all, to allow somebody on air, this is a women's rights movement. We're asking for equality, and to just come on and say that kind of thing. And secondly, he keeps saying this is a trivial issue, that it doesn't happen very often. The reality, as you know from talking to women in the street, is that they all have words that bother them. This is something that affects loads and loads of women, and if he's not affected by it, well, lucky him. And if he thinks he's going to take that privilege and just wander on air and say obnoxious things about a campaign for equality, then that is horrific bigotry, and I object to it being aired. But it's not about equality, because
they didn't bother to analyse what men think. It's not about equality. Look, if anything, this is probably the use of language and pet names is probably something that could be classed as a microaggression.
Another one.
Women are still only earning 81 pence for every pound that men earn in this country. And if we carry on at the current rate, it's going to take another 52 years. 52 years for that pay divide to disappear. I mean, we've been waiting 44 years since the Equal Pay Act. It shouldn't take a century.
Well, that is the subject of today's Sky Debate. Are women unfairly paid less than men? How real is the pay divide between men and women, and should firms be shamed over it? Well, joining us now to discuss that are the feminist activist and comedian Kate Smurthwaite and Kate Andrews, who's head of communications at the Adam Smith Institute. Before we get started, though, a reminder that you can join the debate to tweet at Jane Secker Sky, including the hashtag Sky Debate, text 84501 or email news@sky.com and let us know what you think, or if there are any points you want to put to the guests, and we'll try to read out some of your comments as we go along. Kate Andrews, let's start with you. We know that women are paid less than men. The facts are incontrovertible. But do you think it's fair? Do you think women deserve to earn less? Of course, they take time off to have children, don't they? They often want to work part-time when they come back. Why should they be paid the same as their male colleagues?
Well, there's no doubt that women still face hurdles in the workforce, but these hurdles seem to be there despite the fact that their employers tend to pay them more in many circumstances. that their employers tend to promote them more in certain circumstances. The Office of National Statistics found just a couple of weeks ago that women aged between 20 and 40 tend to earn on average 1.1% more than their male counterparts. And another recent study found that if women don't exit the workplace, they tend to get promoted more aggressively than their male counterparts. So it doesn't seem to be the case that employers are trying to pay women less based on their gender. It seems to be other factors that are creating this gap. And most of them are cultural. Most of them have to do with the fact that women are leaving the workplace to have children, or they're choosing jobs to make it easier to have children. And that's a problem for us. That's a problem for society. It's not something that government should be legislating against. Perhaps we have unfair expectations and traditional expectations on women that shouldn't exist in 2014.
Well, let's put those points to Kate Smurth. Is that a fair point, Kate? You know, it's just reflecting society. Employers aren't sitting there looking at their pay scales and going, oh, she's a woman, we can get away with paying her a bit less. They're simply reflecting what society thinks.
Well, I mean, first of all, this idea that it all comes down to women choosing to have children, etc., etc. I mean, there's almost three things I need to say about that. Firstly, I don't want to live in a world where people who choose to have children are then unable to get good work afterwards and unable to continue their careers. Secondly, if women were paid more equally and treated more fairly in the workplace, I think there's a good chance we'd see more of them wanting to come back to work full-time, wanting and being able to afford childcare and wanting to take that on. And if you're in a relationship, you know, a male-female relationship, and the guy is earning much more than the woman, the decision for her to take the time off to look after the children might well not even be a cultural or a social one. It might well just be a practical one, that the higher earner has to be the one that keeps working. So we should be challenging these things at every step of it. But also, I don't believe that women's life choices are actually what's driving the pay gap. If that were the case, we would reasonably expect to see that women who have reached the top of their professions across the board are women who don't have children. You know, let's look at women without a cleaner at home. Are they on a level pegging with men? And the answer is no. In actual fact, it doesn't seem to be the case that women who don't have children are racing through and you know, making it into the higher echelons of our society. If we look at the most successful women, you know, in the country, from Margaret Thatcher to Kate Winslet, actually many of them have children. In fact, it doesn't seem to be about these life choices. And bearing in mind that we're talking about women choosing to take on caring roles, now put that into context of the fact that even in the caring industry, where women have all this extra experience, they still earn £100,000 in a lifetime less than their male counterparts in the same industry. So it's clearly not about life choices. It's clearly about not conscious sexism, not people deliberately saying, let's pay all the women a bit less, but women not being taken seriously in the workplace, people assuming women are not ambitious, when women are ambitious, them being told that they're being aggressive and that it's not feminine, and all that kind of stuff that all combines together sort of a million micro incidents of sexism that add up over a lifetime, yes, frighteningly,
okay,
to
let's
£200,000.
let the other Kate get a word in edgeways. Kate, you know, is Kate right that perhaps women don't want to be seen as aggressive in the workplace? I'll give you an anecdote. When I started off in this job, I discovered that a colleague was being paid £2 grand more than me. Went to ask my boss why, and he said, because he asked for it. Women just don't ask. Is that part of the problem?
It may be part of the problem. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that women aren't asking for higher salaries when they first come into the workplace. And that does have an effect on the gender wage gap. But I like so much of what Kate just said, and I completely agree with her, that men who could be staying at home with kids or have a more financially good reason to be staying home with the kids when women and their wives and their partners are earning more, should be. This isn't the case that you know, women should just be staying at home with the kids and we should adopt these traditional aspects. I completely agree that we need to have a complete reform as a whole. Society as a whole needs to change their minds about what women should be doing in the workplace. But to go back to earning less in very specific circumstances when they have the exact same job as the male employees. These statistics are very misleading. They tend to be very broad and group together all different kinds of professions. So doctors and physicians will be in one big group together, or all child-minding professions will be in one big group together. And they will compare GPs who are working 9 to 5 in very important, very good jobs to surgeons who have had 20 years of training, who have very unflexible hours.
What about this comparison? Sorry to interrupt you, but it's been in the news this week because of the leaks from Sony over the emails. The film American Hustle, the two female stars, Jennifer Lawrence and Amy Andrews, they were paid less on the back-end deal, as it's called, the money that they get after the film is successful. They were paid 7%. The men were paid 9%. The two women who were the stars of that film, they went on to win Golden Globes. The men didn't. Why were they paid less?
I'm not sure particularly which film we're talking about, but I would have to ask... American Hustle.
It was the second biggest grossing film last year.
Okay, thank you. Well, Jennifer Lawrence had a supporting role in that film. I think that very much dictates why she would have less of a stake in that. When it comes to Amy Adams, I can't... Oh, she got a Golden Globe. I mean, but we don't compare the success of somebody in terms of their artistic ability necessarily to the amount of time that they're actually spending working. Jennifer Lawrence had less shoots to do. She had less time that she had to be in hair and makeup. She had less time to be on the set. And both of these women are absolutely phenomenal.
Spend less time in hair and makeup.
Kate, what's your point?
Well, I'm not sure we can argue. I'm not sure we can argue that women in films spend less time in hair and makeup. I think they're forced to sustain a much higher beauty standard than men in similar roles. I mean, obviously.
But look at the two women that we're talking about right now. We're talking about two of the most successful women on the planet. I care about the average woman who's going to work every day, who's not being. But they're not necessarily getting paid less than the men who do the same jobs. The National National Statistics Office, no, they found that women between the ages of 20 and 40, they found this out a couple of weeks ago, that they are getting paid 1.1% more than their male colleagues. Your point place or that they'd be more encouraged to come back to the workplace if they were earning as much as their male colleagues just isn't true. They are earning more than their male colleagues on average today. This was found by the British government. These women. But
what happens is that when these numbers come out, because there is such a backlash against anybody, and it was really fascinating a minute ago, you were asked, what is it that's causing these kind of discrepancies? And it seemed like no one would say it out loud. I have an answer to that question. It's called sexism. You know, some of it overt, some of it very in your face. I've had various jobs over the years. I've absolutely been told to my face sometimes, oh, we don't really want a woman in this role, this kind of thing. Working as a performer now in comedy, we hear about women, are they funny, etc. I hear it all the time. So there is overt sexism. There's also
I just want to clarify.
Sexism.
I just want to clarify. You think that Jennifer Lawrence and Amy Adams were paid 7% instead of 9%, not because of previous experience, not because of negotiations that they had formerly with potentially their agents, with potentially the movie agency. You think it's because we are inherently sexist and there's just no scenario in which Jennifer Lawrence could possibly be paid less than Bradley Cooper. I mean, to me, that just makes absolutely no sense.
No, of course there are films in which you might get paid more, but overall, on average, this is what the pay gap is about. It's not about saying, here's one woman, what does she earn compared to the next guy. It's about saying, overall, as a society, are we valuing men and women equally? And the answer is obviously not. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. Let me finish. Here's the thing. What you are doing is what happens so often on these issues is you pick up on the one statistic. Actually, in this narrow little age range, in this little region, we found women were doing a teeny little bit better. So there you go. There's no problem. Overall, there is a pay gap. Overall, there is a huge pay gap. And is it that women are less intelligent, less capable, less hardworking? I don't believe that's true. So what it must be is that somewhere in our society there is sexual discrimination going on. Not necessarily overt all of the time, although sometimes overt. Just in women not being taken seriously. You talk about why don't women ask for a pay rise, and yet there have been studies which show that when women do ask for a pay rise, they're seen as a nuisance, they're seen as bothersome, they're seen as being, too aggressive, and they're then not only not given it, but marked down for having even asked. So women are making very smart choices.
Okay, Kate, final point to you, because Kate's right, isn't she? She's looking at the overall picture. The pay gap is still 9.6%.
Yes.
Why is it that we have to wait till another 50-odd years for equal pay, according to projections, when the Equal Pay Act was back in 1970? Why do women have to wait?
We are not waiting another 50 years for equal pay. If you are coming into the workforce as a young woman, you are most likely going to be making more now than your male counterpart. And that's something that the British government came up with a few weeks ago. That's not just my personal opinion. If you want to look at the overall spectrum of the situation, you have jumped from saying that there is a pay gap and thus it must be sexism. And we've completely ignored the fact that women are still choosing to stay home with their children, that men are not being helpful enough to stay home with their children, that women are making more than their male counterparts before they leave the workplace, that they're more likely to get promoted than their male counterparts when they're in the workplace. You've jumped over all of these very important facts that contribute to the wage gap.
You won't even say the word. What about sexism? Surely you've got to admit that some of it is plain old-fashioned sexism.
Well, of course there is still sexism in various parts of our society.
Let's challenge that in this very simple, very niche way by making companies publish their pay gap. It's not a big ask. We're only talking about companies with 250 employees.
I would love to challenge sexism in a real way, but asking companies to publish arbitrary numbers when they broadly categorize different occupations together that shouldn't be categorized together, to put it out to the public with no context, is gender